Hi. By the end of this video, you will know about all the uses of the subjunctive mood in the Greek New Testament. Each of these uses will be illustrated from the Gospel of Matthew. My name is Rob McIver. Let's talk about the subjunctive mood. Our goal in this series is to make learning New Testament Greek easier. And we can do that with a subjunctive mood by starting with what you probably already know. For example, on this slide, I have the information that I usually share with my beginning Greek class. The indicative mood is used to give statements or assertions about factual events. The subjunctive mood is used to express contingencies or possibilities. And the nice thing about the subjunctive mood is there are clues to expect a subjunctive. For example, hina is going to be always followed by a subjunctive and is going to be usually in the sense of in order that or that. An, ume, etc. are also likewise indicators of the subjunctive and reasonably straightforward to translate. The other way I try and make Greek moods easier is to compare them with the English mood, and there is a separate video in which I do this in more detail. As you can see, there is a great deal of overlap between the way the English indicative mood and the Greek indicative moods are used. And there is a considerable overlap with the imperative mood as well, but when we get to the subjunctive, they are quite different. And while many of the uses of the English subjunctive are mirrored in the Greek subjunctive, there are some brand new uses. In fact, when we look at the way the subjunctive is used across the New Testament, we will see that it's used in purpose clauses. Sometimes these are called final clauses, in indefinite clauses, in strong denial, in hortatory clauses, in prohibitions, to make a deliberation, they're used in some conditional sentences, they're used as the objective of certain verbs. We're going to have to explain that, aren't we? And there are other stock constructions as well. Now, I have indicated the number of times each one of these is used in the Gospel of Matthew. And I'm delighted to see that they're all there, even the hortatory subjunctive, which in my mind is found more frequently in other parts of the New Testament, but it's there in Matthew as well. And you can see that there are some uses that are much more common than other uses, and I have highlighted the most common uses in yellow, and the second most common uses in, what is that? It's a form of blue, isn't it? And so the most common uses are in final clauses or purpose clauses, in indefinite clauses, and in conditional sentences. And it's used enough times in Matthew and prohibition and as the objective of certain verbs that it makes it worth our while knowing that. Now, just writing down a list of possible uses of the subjunctive is a little bit helpful, but I think it's better if we provide some examples. So the first thing I did is to create a table, and here is the table. In the left-hand column, I put the different uses of the subjunctive in purpose or final clauses, the subjunctive in indefinite clauses, etc. And I noted as I filled in the column of where we can find these different uses, the various markers that are found in the New Testament that will indicate a subjunctive is following or that expect a subjunctive. So, for example, hina is followed by a subjunctive, as is όπως, as is epan, heos an, etc. So once I had this list, I looked through them and thought which ones are good examples to illustrate the particular uses. We have here a subjunctive in a purpose or final clause introduced by hina. Now I have there a quotation from BDAG Okay, BDAG is the standard lexicon of the Greek New Testament, and it's Bauer, Danker, Arndt, and Gingerich, who have been at various times editors of this major work, and known to its friends in New Testament circles as BDAG. By the way, a good footnote, if you have Logos or Accordance, adding BDAG is actually a very useful resource if you're going to be dealing with the Greek New Testament. So according to BDAG, the first use of hina is as a marker to denote purpose, aim, or goal. The words in italics, this is indicate this is the way it is translated, in order that, or that, and then the final sense. So that is a shorthand way of saying in a purpose clause. So let's look at these examples which use hina plus subjunctive to form a final clause. Matthew 27:26. Then he released to them Barabbas. When he scourged Jesus, he gave him hina staurothe, in order that he might be crucified. So staurothe is the aorist passive of stauroo and follows hina to form a purpose clause. He delivered him up in order that he might be crucified. Matthew 27:32. Yes, so this is part of the crucifixion narrative. They've scourged Jesus and they're now taking him out to be crucified. And as they go, they find a man, a Cyrenian, named Simon. Torta engarusan, this person, they forced or compelled hina are ton staron orto, in order that, or for the purpose of, him carrying his cross, right? So the hina plus subjunctive for the purpose of carrying his cross, or in order that he might carry his cross. Are is the aorist subjunctive of airo, which means carry. Matthew 27:20. So this verse belongs to a slightly earlier part of the Passion narrative. It belongs to the incident where Pilate brings out Barabbas and stands him beside Jesus and saying, well, you choose Barabbas or Jesus. But the chief priests and elders, epaisen, persuaded from Pytho, tus oklus, the crowds, for the purpose of ite sontai, that they might ask for Barabbas, tonda Jesus apellesosen, from apellumi, which means to destroy, but to destroy Jesus. So the high priests and the elders persuaded the crowds with the purpose of, well, doesn't quite flow with the purpose, does it? So in order that they might ask for Barabbas, but Jesus they would destroy. You'll see a note there that we haven't finished with hina. We're going to find a different meaning of hina from BDAG and some examples also in the Gospel of Matthew. Yes, just wait for that. Now, as well as using hina plus subjunctive to form final clauses, Matthew makes considerable use of όπως plus subjunctive. And again, I thought, I didn't think όπως was used nearly as often as hina. So I did a little search in Logos, and here's what I came up with. Matthew uses hina 39 times and όπως 17 times. So όπως gets quite a bit of usage in Matthew. Mark, on the other hand, uses hina 64 times and όπως only once. And remember, Mark is quite a deal shorter than Matthew. Luke, 46 hinas and 7 όπως. Mind you, Luke also wrote Acts, and you'll see in Acts it's kind of evenly balanced. 15 hinas and 14 όπως. John, wow, John has a όπως plus subjunctive exactly once and 145 hina plus subjunctives. So as you look down there, I think that's absolutely fascinating. We have two works that make quite extensive use of όπως. Matthew, and Acts. Isn't that interesting? Well, anyway, in Matthew, όπως plus subjunctive is used in a way that's quite analogous to hina plus subjunctive, although BDAG shows that it has a slightly different feel about it. According to BDAG, the most common use of όπως is as an adverb and marks the manner in which an event's developed, and translated with how or that. 2, as a conjunction, a marker expressing purpose for an event or state in order that, and that is followed by the subjunctive. So όπως plus subjunctive is used in Matthew quite a lot to show in order that. For example, in Matthew 13:34-35. And apart from parables, he didn't speak to them. Όπως, and όπως plus subjunctive, plerothe. Plerothe is the aorist passive of pleroo. So in order that, be fulfilled. So what was going to be fulfilled? Tochreithen, well, that's from a form of the verb to say, so that which is said through the dia to prophetu, through the prophet. Matthew 22:15. Όπως or ton pagadousosin en logo. So the Pharisees took counsel, όπως, in order that. Paragdouxosin is to entrap him in logo, with a word, or with dialogue, I guess. So that is using hina plus subjunctive or όπως plus subjunctive to form purpose clauses. As is so common with the subjunctive, these are reasonably straightforward constructions because hina is going to be followed by a subjunctive, and it is frequently translated as a final clause. Or όπως followed by a subjunctive is going to be translated as a final clause. So we have not just the subjunctive sitting by itself, but there is a marker saying, watch out, here's a subjunctive coming and it's likely to mean. So this is a use of the subjunctive that is quite different from English, but it's easy for us English speakers to understand because it is so consistently found set out like this: hina plus subjunctive or όπως plus subjunctive. The most common use of the subjunctive mood in the Gospel of Matthew is to form indefinite clauses. And there are lots of markers that come before the subjunctive that give us the clue that, yes, we're making an indefinite clause, and yes, a subjunctive is coming. All of these will have a form of an in them, and I've said an or an, but you can see that an is part of an already, can't you? So they have an or an in them, and that distinguishes this use of the subjunctive from other uses. So we can see epan, heos an, can, hos an, hosa an, etc. introduce a indefinite clause that has a subjunctive in it. Let's look at some examples. So we have Matthew 5:18. We've actually got two heos ans in that sentence, haven't we? We've got heos an parelthe ho aranos kai gay until heaven and earth pass away, because heos an means until. Starting at the beginning, truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away. Iota hen, one iota, or one kariah. Kariah is a small part of a Hebrew letter that distinguishes it from a letter with a round corner and a letter with a corner. One means an R sound and one means a D sound. So, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota or a smallest part of a letter, ume, yes, here is another marker of a subjunctive, we will find out in a second or two, definite denial, strong denial, will definitely not parelthe, pass away, epotu nomu, from the law, heos an, until pantagenetai, all things have taken place. Genetai from genomai. So we have heos and pereuthe, that's the aorist subjunctive, and genetai is a subjunctive as well. Another example, this time from hosan, which means whoever. Matthew 5:21-22. You have heard that it was said to the ancients, phronusai, you will not murder. Hosan, see, whoever, phronusai, so whoever murders, enokos estai te krisai, will be liable to the judgment. Enokos, liable, subject to, will receive probably. But I say, human, to you, ego de lego, but I say to you that pass everyone, the ones who are angry with their brother or sister, will be liable to judgment. Hostean, I pay. Whoever, hosan, whoever, the delta there with the apostrophe is the conjunction de, which means and or but. And whoever says to his brother, raka, fool, will be liable to the Sanhedrin. Whoever says foolish person will be guilty, will be liable for the hell of fire. So you can see there is three uses of hostean. Hosan, whoever, followed by the subjunctives, phronusai, ipe, and ipe. Once we have recognized the lead-in, hosan, we're expecting a subjunctive. It's an indefinite clause, whoever, and, well, once again, it's reasonably straightforward to translate. And the Greek has given us lots of clues. Matthew 24:15. Hotan un idata. Hotan, whenever, un, therefore, or for, whenever, idata is from horao. The aorist of horao is idon. The aorist subjunctive of horao is ido. So we have here idata. So whenever you see the desolating sacrilege, etc. 26:29. Well, here we have more than one use of the subjunctive. We have another ume plus subjunctive for strong denial. I say to you, ume pio, I will definitely not drink from now of the fruit of this vine, heos, until, tes homeros ekainos, until that day, hotan, whenever, plus subjunctive, hotan or to pino, met human, whenever I drink with you in the kingdom of my Father. So we have hotan pino, whenever I drink. Now, I think this is a whole page of good news, don't you? Because if you have an or an an, you are going to have an indefinite clause, and it's going to have a subjunctive. So you have a big signal there's going to be a subjunctive. The signal consistently means one thing, and the subjunctive follows. So these are very straightforward to translate, and more importantly, very straightforward to understand. So we have epan, whenever, heosan, until, can, even if, hosan, whoever, hoean, whatever, hosean, whatever, hosean, whatever. Well, these are all kind of variations on the one thing, aren't they? Hosean, whoever, hosan, whoever, hosean, whatever, hopuean, wherever, hosa, en, whatever, hostis, and whoever, and hosus, and whoever. Again, some of those are just different cases of the pronouns. And then hotan, whatever. Easy to recognize, easy to translate, easy to interpret. The subjunctive of strong denial might only be used 13 times in the Gospel of Matthew, but in almost every instance it is used in a theologically significant place in the text. So, let's look at some examples. Ume just means strong denial, definitely not. Matthew 5:18. For truly I tell you, not one iota or one choria will pass away from the law. Okay, ume parelthe. So, an iota or a choria will definitely not pass away from the law. Ume plus parelthe. Matthew 24:2. Do you not see these things? The disciples have just shown Jesus all of the new building works that have been going on with regard to renewing the temple, started under Herod the Great and continuing for many years thereafter. And Jesus responds, do you not see these things? Or do you not see panta, all these things? Truly I tell you, ume, definitely not, ephethe, from ephiemi, leave, will definitely not be left here, hoda, lithos, epi, lithon, stone upon stone, which will not be kataluo. Luo, loosed, kata, down, so cast down or thrown down. Matthew 26:29. I truly tell you, ume poio, I will definitely not drink of the fruit of this vine until we drink it you together in the kingdom of my Father. So ume poio, I will definitely not. So ume, like the other signals of the subjunctive, is a clear signal, expect a subjunctive, it is a strong denial, and once we've recognized this, this is easy to translate and to understand. The hortatory subjunctive is used only 5 times in the Gospel of Matthew, and quite frankly, I was surprised that it was there at all. It's not a common use in most books of the Bible, but in the book of Hebrews, for example, we will find it used quite a lot. Let us draw near, let us approach, those kind of expressions. So in the hortatory subjunctive, a first-person subjunctive is used to exhort people to do something, urge people to do something. So let's look at Matthew 21:38. And when the tenants saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, apoktainomen orton, come, let us kill him and divide his inheritance. Apoktainomen, a first-person subjunctive, let us. Matthew 26:46, Jesus says to his disciples, egeirthe agomen, get up, let us go. Again, let us, urging them to do something. 27:49, and the others said, aphes, idomen, I erketai elias soso orton. Wait, idomen, let us see, from horeo, aorist idon, aorist subjunctive, ido. So we have wait, let us see, idomen, if erketai Elias comes, saving him. Yeah, Elias comes to save him. The subjunctive of prohibition is found 31 times, and I have to say that I was rather surprised that it occurs that often. The subjunctive of prohibition works like this. When you are telling people not to do something, that is a command, and in English we would use an imperative. And if the present tense is being used, the imperative indeed is used in Greek. So it would be may plus some form of the present imperative. However, if the aorist tense is used, then it is may plus the subjunctive aorist. And remember that the aorist tense is kind of like the default tense. It's the one that's used most often. So let's look at some examples. Matthew 5:17, me nomisate, do not consider. from nomidzo, may plus the aorist subjunctive of nomidzo means do not do something. In 542, to aitunta se dos, and to the one who asks you, give, and to the one who wishes to borrow from you, may apostrophes, do not turn away. Again, may plus the aorist subjunctive. Matthew 24:4. And answering, Jesus said to them, Blepeti me tis humas planeso. Beware, may, right, may plus aorist subjunctive, planese, from planao, beware, do not let anyone deceive you. Matthew 24:23. And if any says to you, behold, here is the Christ, or here, may pistusate, do not believe. May plus aorist subjunctive, prohibition. Now, once we have seen a number of these, and remember there are 27 of them, with may plus subjunctive, and a couple of other forms of it as well, to make 31 uses in Matthew, it's not a surprise, although it's nothing like the way the English uses the subjunctive, is it? But if there's a pattern, we can recognize it and see it. The subjunctive is also used in a deliberative sense, so if we are considering one option over another option. And we have several examples here following the interrogative T. Matthew 6:25, for example. Because of this, I tell you, actually, as well as the deliberative subjunctive, we've got a subjunctive of prohibition there, haven't we? May plus merimnata. So, do not consider your, and suke is an interesting use of the word, which we would normally translate soul or life. So don't worry about your life. What T fagata, what you should eat, or T pieta, what you should drink, neither T inducesta, what you should put on, to wear. Matthew 10:19. So whenever they deliver you, do not worry how or T lelesata, how or what to say. So again, it's deliberative, for it will be given you in that day what to say. There are no fewer than 40 conditional sentences in the Gospel of Matthew that are introduced with the word en. Just means if. And when people are analysing conditional sentences, we say that en is an indication of a more probable future condition. In English, though, we just translate it with the word if. 523. En un prosperes to doron su epi to thusiasterion. And if while carrying your gift to the altar you remember there that your brother has something against you, well, turn around and go and get reconciled first, Jesus says. Matthew 5:46. En gar agapesato tos agapontes humas. For if you love those who love you, what extra have you done, essentially? And Matthew 24:48. En de ipon ho kakos doulos. If that evil servant, or if the bad servant thinks that his heart, my Lord, is delayed. These, as you can see, are very straightforward to A, translate, and B, to understand. Now, there is another use of hina, which is outlined in BDAG as to, a marker of objective, translated as that, after verbs with a sense of wish, desire, strive, wish that, desire that, or take care, be ashamed, be afraid, request, demand, request that, summon, encourage, order that, cause, bring about, permit, grant. There are 21 times that hina is used in this sense in the Gospel of Matthew. Again, it's hina plus subjunctive. We began by saying hina plus subjunctive is a sign of a final clause, a purpose clause. Yes, that's true, but it also can be a marker of the objective. All right, what on earth are they meaning about the objective? Let's look at some examples that might make sense to us. Matthew 7:12. Panta un hossa an theleita hina poiosin human hoi adelphoi. Panta un, therefore everything, hossa an, everything as much as, theleita. So we have thelo, or want, that men should do to you, or others should do to you. Do that to them. Hutos, in that way, also you do to them. But we have here hina after theleita, and poiosin is subjunctive. So hina plus subjunctive gives the content of what you're wishing, the objective of it, if you like. Matthew 14:36. Kai parakalun orton hina, and they beseeched him that they might only touch the corner of his garment. As we're looking at hina plus subjunctive, which is hapsonta, and that gives the objective of parakalun. It says what they are requesting. Matthew 16:20. Then he commanded the disciples what? Hina plus subjunctive. That. It's the content of what he was commanding his disciples. And what is that? That they should tell nobody that he was the Christ. Now, as I was working through all of the examples of the subjunctive in the Gospel of Matthew, I started off with a standard classification. Then I found there are some standard constructions that also use a subjunctive. So I've put them in a category that I've called other stock constructions. So we have and may, which just means unless. Matthew 5:20. Lego gahumin hoti and may. So therefore I tell you that unless plus subjunctive, perisuse, means overflowing, unless your righteousness overflows greater than that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will definitely not enter the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 18:3. And he said, truly I tell you, and may, unless strapheta, unless you turn, and may plus subjunctive of strapho, kai genesa, again another subjunctive, and become as the children, ume, again another subjunctive of strong denial. You will definitely not enter the kingdom of heaven. And we have heos, until, heos who, while until, maketi, no more, mapoti, lest. And in 5:25 we have become friends with your adversary quickly, while you are already with him on the way. Me potter se parado ho antidikos to crite, lest me poti plus subjunctive, lest your adversary delivers you to the judge, etc. One thing I should mention while we're talking about subjunctives is the effect of tense and subjunctives. Now, pretty much every subjunctive in Matthew is either present tense or aorist tense. In another lecture on tense, I point out that there are three things that influence how we interpret and understand the tense of a verb in the New Testament. There is aspect, there is type of action or actions art, and with the indicative and participial moods, there is some consideration of time. You will see that I've put a big red line through considerations of time, because with the subjunctive and the infinitive, the difference between a present tense and an aorist tense is not a difference of time, but probably best explained as a difference in aspect. And the difference in aspect results in different types of action. A present subjunctive or a present infinitive is often continuous action or iterative action, action that keeps taking place over time. While a aorist subjunctive looks at the action as a whole, Therefore, it can be punctiliar. Now that we have looked at the ranges of the use of the subjunctive mood in the Gospel of Matthew, can we step back a little bit and ask ourselves, well, is there one thing that sums up a subjunctive mood? Does it make sense to us? Well, in this diagram, I would like to draw your attention to the overlapping circles. And I have compared the English indicative mood and the Greek indicative mood. And between the English and the Greek, there is a lot of overlap in the indicative mood. Similarly, in the infinitive mood, there's not quite as much overlap, but there's pretty much substantial overlap. With the subjunctive, though, there's a tiny bit of overlap. The Greek uses the subjunctive in quite a distinctively different way to the English. Well, some of the English subjunctive uses are also found in Greek, but Greek uses ume plus subjunctive, which we don't do in English. Greek uses, well, just about all of the uses we've looked at don't have a corresponding English usage. People look at the pattern of indicative, imperative, subjunctive. So the indicative is making statements about real events. An imperative is asking for something to happen, but it is contingent on somebody else doing it. So it's kind of about real things, but it's contingent. And the argument is the subjunctive is about things that are less real. They're about supposition, perhaps. So let's see if that explains what's going on. Here are the uses that we've looked at of the subjunctive in the Gospel of Matthew, and that pretty much reflects how it's used in the whole of the New Testament. And is this all supposition? Well, yes, it is in some, isn't it? In indefinite clauses, in deliberative, in conditional sentence. But what about strong denial? That's hardly contingency or uncertainty, is it? It's pretty strong. Hortatory led us, well, I guess so. There's an element of supposition, of contingency, of uncertainty, but I have to say my diagram is good, right? The Greek subjunctive, the circle on the right, is quite, it's got a number of uses that don't match the English use. And for English speakers, it might be just a process of just letting go your English and sort of hearing how the Greek subjunctive is used. But the news is really good, though, because the subjunctive is very predictable. It comes with markers. So for the final clause, we've got hina or όπως plus the subjunctive. For the indefinite clauses, we have got some form of an or ean. For the strong denial, we've got ume plus the subjunctive. For the hortatory subjunctive, it's the first person subjunctive. For a prohibition, it's may plus the aorist subjunctive. For a deliberative, it's with t. For conditional, it's with en. And as the objective, it's again hina. So the subjunctive is consistent. It gives a flag. Here is a definite meaning, and we're going to use a subjunctive with it. The subjunctive is already somewhat easy. But you might be asking, Rob, you promised that you would make the subjunctive easier. Well, yes, I hope I've taken away some of the fear of the subjunctive, and I've said, well, yes, it's straightforward, it's consistent. You memorize those introductory flags and add plus subjunctive, and you understand what's going on. If you really want to know the subjunctive, why don't you mirror the process that I went through? Here is the uses of the subjunctive. There are the flags. Why don't you just use logos or accordance to search for all of the examples of a subjunctive in the Gospel of Matthew and go through and just classify them as you come to them. In both logos and accordance, it's relatively straightforward to obtain a report that lists all the verbs in Matthew that are in the subjunctive mood. Let's show you how I would go about doing this in the Gospel of Matthew. I would begin by checking that I have got morph selected here. Now this can be important if you've just started using Logos, because it seems to be installed set at Bible. So choose morph, and then we don't want all of the New Testament, we only want the Gospel of Matthew. So I come here and I type Matthew, and it suggests Matthew, and there it is. My next step is to type at here. Now, you can come down this menu and choose Verb, or if you know, you just call it at V. And we are looking for all the subjunctives, and there it is. We now have all the subjunctives chosen, and if I press return, wow, there they all are, all of the subjunctives in the Gospel of Matthew, going right back to the beginning of the Gospel and to the last part of the Gospel. There are 282 verbs in Matthew that are in the subjunctive mood. This is how I would use accordance to find the subjunctive verbs in Matthew. Well, first of all, I'd need to choose my Greek New Testament. So there is the 28th edition of the Nestle Aland Greek New Testament. Then my next step is to press Ctrl+2, which opens up a Greek construct. Now I've discovered that leaving my English parallel translation open probably crowds the screen a bit too much. So this is one of the real nice features of accordance. You start here with a verb, you drag it across, and then it says, well, do you want to be more specific? Do you want to choose a particular person or a particular tense, avoid, or, hey, what we want, a mood. So we choose that. So that is our search setup, except we would like to search only the Gospel of Matthew. How do I do that? Well, I come up here, I click that plus, and I can choose a range. So I click on the range, and, well, you can see I've been here before because Matthew's showing up. But for you, it probably won't be there yet. So to define a range, what I do is I enter a definition, Matthew, and then I name it, and then I verify that that's a valid definition. Then I update it, and you can see that Matthew is now the part of the Greek New Testament that's going to be searched. Pressing enter reveals every occurrence of the subjunctive mood in the Gospel of Matthew. And the other way to make the subjunctive easier is to use my book, Intermediate New Testament Greek Made Easier. In chapter 1, we have got a summary of the principal uses, then we've got some exercises, followed by the analysis of several chapters from the Greek New Testament, which if you've worked through, you will find not just the subjunctive, but the other moods of the verb begin to make sense. Hey, if you found this video helpful or interesting, why don't you click the like button below? Thank you.